Hey, what's up everyone, this is White Pointer, and it's time to dive into some video game history again. One of gaming's biggest mysteries that still remains unsolved is whether pop music star Michael Jackson composed at least some of the soundtrack for 1994's Sonic the Hedgehog 3. His name is not found in the game's official credits, but that's not actually entirely unusual for Michael Jackson. He had a habit of occasionally making appearances and going uncredited, perhaps most notably in the animated comedy The Simpsons, where he played an inmate in a mental institution in the episode Stark Raving Dad.
I can't believe you never heard of me. I'm a very popular entertainer.
Oh, of course I've heard of you. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know. What'd you say your name was?
Michael Jackson.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Well, have you heard of MTV?
Nope.
Motown?
No.
Beat It?
You beat it.
Thriller?
What was that last one?
Thriller?
Nope.
In this case, the show credited him under the alias John J. Smith. However, none of the 6 names credited for Sonic the Hedgehog 3's music are fake. So what led fans to believe Jackson may have been involved in the project? It began when a young man by the name of Ben Mallison made a post on a Sonic-centric online message board in 2003, detailing how he noticed similarities in Sonic the Hedgehog 3's soundtrack and Michael Jackson's works. That one post kick-started a lengthy investigation by a legion of loyal Sonic fans. Jackson had previously worked with Sega on the Mega Drive and Master System versions of the 1990 game Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, a game that was heavily promoted by Sega at the time in their quest to one-up Nintendo. Michael Jackson was the world's biggest pop star in the early 90s, so why wouldn't you shout about the game from the rooftops? It was well known that Jackson was a fan of Sega games, and Sonic the Hedgehog in particular, having visited the Sega offices to meet those that were responsible for creating it. This is the only part of the story that's been somewhat officially confirmed by multiple sources who are working at Sega during this time. Jackson did indeed visit the offices. It's alleged that while he was there, he was asked if he wanted to work on the soundtrack for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This part at least seems true, as former company executive Roger Hector revealed as much in an interview in 2005, but Sega themselves maintained they had never worked with Jackson. The 6 men actually credited for the soundtrack in-game are Brad Buxer, Bobby Brooks, Darryl Ross, Jeff Grace, Doug Grisby III, and Cease Rocco James. All of them having worked with Jackson extensively in the past, especially Brad Buxer, who served as his musical director and performed alongside him on stage on the keyboard. According to Buxer, it was Jackson that invited him onto the project in the first place, as he recalled in an interview with the Huffington Post in 2016. I was working with Michael on the Dangerous album, and he told me he was going to be doing the Sonic the Hedgehog soundtrack for Sonic 3. He asked me if I would help him with it. As the story goes, those aforementioned 6 men worked with Jackson for about a month, creating several dozen tracks of varying lengths for the game. When they sent Sega what they had done, former executive Roger Hector remembered that they were impressed, since it was all new material that sounded distinctly like Michael Jackson's music. It was around this time though, in late 1993, that the child molestation accusations and resulting lawsuit against Jackson were first made public, turning it into a global news story. According to Hector, when this scandal broke out, Sega decided that they didn't want to be associated with Jackson, and redid the entire soundtrack from scratch, enlisting composer Howard Drossen, who is credited under the special thanks section, to do the job. However, that claim is denied by the men that apparently worked with Jackson, who say that the music they gave to Sega is still in the final game. Drossen himself admitted he actually did very little to it before sending it to Sega for final processing. They assert that it was Jackson's request to not be credited because he was not impressed with the quality of the sound that the console was producing, as Buxer explained to French fan magazine Black and White. I've never played the game, so I do not know what tracks on which Michael and I have worked the developers have kept, but we did compose music for the game. Michael called me at the time for help on this project, and that's what I did. And if he's not credited for composing the music, it's because he was not happy with the sounds coming out of the console. At the time, game consoles did not allow optimal sound reproduction, and Michael found it frustrating. He did not want to be associated with a product that devalued his music. Interestingly enough, Buxer also claims that the chord progression used in the game's ending credits was later reused by Jackson in his song Stranger in Moscow. Most unofficial sources are convinced that Jackson at least partially wrote the soundtrack to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, with his name even appearing in the game's listing on game database website Moby Games. At first glance, it seems like an open and shut case. Some parts of the story don't entirely add up, however. Perhaps the biggest one is why Sega would have kept quiet about Jackson's involvement when he first started work on the project. Remember, this was before the accusations against him were made public. This seems incredibly strange, given how much Sega hyped up the release of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker just a few years earlier, and how much of a perk it would have been to have one of the world's biggest entertainers working on their flagship game series. Some believe this is because the initial deal with Jackson had been done without any knowledge of any of the higher-ups at Sega, and no contracts had ever officially been signed, so everything had been done in secret. If Jackson was involved, the bosses at Sega almost certainly were not aware of it, so anything he might have been doing was off the record. Former president of Sega of America Tom Kalinske recollected in an interview with IGN and Sega 16 in 2009 that Jackson was present at the Sega offices, pretty often actually, but was unaware of any deals being done with Popstar. He hung around Sega quite a bit in those days. We did Moonwalker on Genesis and it was reasonably successful, and he used to come up to Redwood Shores and wander around, and he was always very interested in what was going on. And because he was the celebrity that he was, he would sit and talk with the R&D guys. But I don't recall him having any deep involvement with that product. I know he loved it. He loved all the Sonic products. He was particularly close to Al Nilsson, who was the marketing director, so he was around the project, but I don't think he had any real involvement in it. Additionally, if Jackson was indeed frustrated and unhappy with the sound quality, as Buxer claims, it's unclear why that would be the case. Let's go back to Michael Jackson's Moonwalker on the Mega Drive. Jackson didn't seem to have any problems with his music being reproduced in 16 bits for Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, or even in 8 bits in the case of the Master System port for that matter, and would have been aware of the audio capabilities of the system before starting any work on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So why would he compose reportedly around 40 pieces of music only to turn around at the 11th hour and request to be removed from the credits due to not being happy with the quality? It also doesn't really make much sense that Sega would remove the singer's name from the game and remove any references to him that may have been there, but keep the work he contributed. It seems even more nonsensical when you consider the conflicting reports regarding what actually happened to the tracks Jackson allegedly wrote. Did they end up in the finished game, or didn't they? Were only some of them used rather than all of them, and if so, why? What also seems confusing is why Jackson would reuse music he originally wrote for a video game in his own songs, when he had no need to. Some other theories suggest that the 6 men who were credited for the game soundtrack, who were very familiar with Jackson's work, instead composed music that was inspired by him, the kind of music Jackson himself would write. Sega would go on to collaborate with Jackson again for the Dreamcast games Space Channel 5 and Space Channel 5 Part 2, raising the question of why they would terminate their relationship with Jackson, only to team up with him again some years later. Sega don't do themselves any favours in the whole conspiracy, mind you, continually categorically either denying Jackson had any involvement or sidestepping the question whenever it's raised, choosing to offer no comment. Throwing fuel onto the fire is that when Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was ported to PC, they replaced a number of the music tracks in the game, for undisclosed reasons. Moreover, the entire game of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was also strangely absent, once again unexplained, in the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis Classics compilation package, and even the Sega Mega Drive Mini / Genesis Mini standalone console in 2019, despite the fact the other games in the series were included in both cases. Why would they either replace music tracks in ports or omit the game completely in collections, except to avoid possible legal issues? Whatever the truth is, it remains one of gaming's more intriguing mysteries. Was Michael Jackson involved in creating Sonic the Hedgehog 3 soundtrack? It's entirely possible, but if he was, it was done behind closed doors without really informing anyone else at Sega. Either way, there really isn't enough compelling evidence to support either side of the argument, and we can't say with 100% certainty whether he did or didn't contribute. We know at the very least that several musicians close to Jackson worked on the soundtrack, and that Jackson himself visited the Sega offices, perhaps multiple times. Whether he contributed to any projects, such as Sonic the Hedgehog 3 while he was there, however, is a question that seems like it will remain an enigma. So what do you think? Do you think Michael Jackson composed some of the music to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, or didn't he? Let me know in the comments below, and give me a thumbs up if you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with my content. Thanks for watching.